Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed.
Argentina's national soccer club has just canceled its friendly match with Israel this weekend, buckling under what appears to be intense international pressure as well as security concerns. That means superstar Lionel Messi won't be coming to Israel after all, and apparently not even Prime Minister Netanyahu himself could salvage the game. Argentina's national team was originally set to play this friendly warm-up match against Israel's team in Haifa before heading out to compete in the 2018 World Cup. But it wasn't until the Israeli government moved the match to Jerusalem that the situation became somewhat messy. Palestinians immediately accused Israeli leaders of politicizing the game by moving it to Jerusalem and announced that they'd burn Messi jerseys if the game went ahead. On top of this, it soon emerged that Culture and Sports Minister Miri Regev made a cash deal with the government to fund the move to Jerusalem in exchange for photo ops with Messi on the field. This is in addition to allegations that Regev's ministry actually only put up 10,000 game tickets for sale to the public out of 30,000. The rest being reserved for various government entities, NGOs, and corporate sponsors. For Palestinians, this cancellation is a massive win, perhaps one of the biggest wins for BDS supporters. But Palestinian leaders say they had no problem with the game when it was scheduled in Haifa, where Israeli and Arab soccer fans routinely gather. Despite this, Messi and his family do say they received death threats against playing the game at all. But at the end of the day, Israelis are mostly devastated to see the match fall apart. Prime Minister Netanyahu called Argentina's president to try and intercede, but President Macri told him that the ball was no longer on his side of the field.
Mere days after Hamas and Israel entered a ceasefire to halt the violence coming out of Gaza, terror cells fired a fresh barrage of rockets from the Strip into Israeli territory, bringing that deal crashing down. Most of the rockets landed in open fields, though Israel's Iron Dome's defense system did intercept at least 3. No casualties or damage have been reported at this time. In response, the IDF has carried out 2 rounds of airstrikes on Hamas targets throughout the Strip. At least 15 Hamas sites, including a weapons manufacturing and storage warehouse, have been hit in these counterattacks. Palestinian sources say that Hamas was not, in fact, behind these latest rocket attacks. Instead, a rogue terror group is believed to be behind it. But regardless of who pulls the trigger, Israel does hold Hamas directly accountable for all security in Gaza, which is why these retaliations have struck Hamas targets. This is also why Hamas was apparently so eager to sign a ceasefire deal last week after Israel counterattacks pummeled its military sites in one of the worst flare-ups between Israel and Gaza since 2014's Operation Protective Edge. Analysts say that both sides are eager to avoid an all-out war at this time. In order to avoid this scenario, however, Palestinian leaders will need to sow those seeds of peace for the people. Over the weekend in the West Bank, a Palestinian man attempted to ram his car into a group of IDF soldiers. Israeli security teams responded with live fire, killing the suspect on the spot.
Israeli forces have just revealed the arrest of an East Jerusalem man who was allegedly planning to assassinate the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat earlier this year. The 30-year-old suspect has been identified as an Arab Israeli, Mohammed Jamal Rashed, and he was apparently working on orders from a Syrian-based terror group. According to Israel's Shin Bet security service, he was arrested back in April, along with 2 other suspects who have not yet been publicly identified. Indictments have been filed against all 3, but the case has been kept under a court-issued gag order until now. Rashed was allegedly planning to carry out a number of terror attacks against a variety of targets, including Netanyahu and Barkat, as well as buildings belonging to the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. One of the plans apparently targeted a delegation of Canadian security officials who were visiting Jerusalem to train Palestinian Authority security forces in the West Bank. A Shin Bet spokesperson says Rashed had received orders from members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which fights alongside Syrian dictator Bashar Assad. In order to carry out the attacks, Rashed and his accomplices were planning to bring an additional terrorist operative from Jordan. Rashed is a resident of the Shuafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem and has previously been incarcerated for terrorist activities.
In an increasingly popular and effective trend, Palestinians from Gaza are regularly flying homemade kites over the border and dropping firebombs on Israeli soil. Combined with the summer heat, these incendiary kite attacks have erupted into massive fires that have engulfed over 2,000 acres of Israeli fields and tens of thousands of acres of nature reserves. The government estimates that some $2.5 million worth of agriculture alone has been burnt to ash. Firefighters near the Gaza border have been working overtime lately to calm the deadly flames. And though the fires have not claimed any casualties so far, this is clearly no laughing matter. This problem now stands as one of the biggest on-the-ground threats to Israel's national security. For Palestinians, this homemade workaround is a clever alternative to Israel's use of deadly force against rioters on the Gaza border. A homemade terror attack of sorts that only costs a few dollars and cents.
يطلقون صافرات الإنذار، يطلقون قبة حديدية لرصد أو لاعتراض الصواريخ، لكن بفضل الله عز وجل هذه سدت عن إطلاق الصواريخ وكبدتهم الخسائر على تخوم قطاع غزة.
But Israeli leaders are quickly understanding the full scale of this threat. Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan believes IDF snipers should actually be able to shoot kite flyers on sight. Other government leaders are hoping civilian drone flyers may be a more peaceful way to cut the strings of violence, but speculate that deadly force may indeed be the final line of defense.
We will overcome this problem with, I would say, efforts in the intelligence and the operational and the technological side. It will be over this way or another.
Well, we're seeing a shocking turnaround in southern Syria. A Syrian war monitor is reporting that thousands of Iranian and Hezbollah fighters are actually preparing to withdraw from southern Syria, backing away from the Israeli border. And the timing does not seem to be mere coincidence. In fact, after months of lobbying, many believe that Israel has just signed a secret deal with Russia to make this withdrawal a reality. At this time, Israel has denied any such deal with Russia, but sources say that last week's visit by Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman to Moscow was likely the finalizing of a long-sought-after deal with Russia to extend the buffer zone in southern Syria. According to reports, Iranian and Hezbollah infantry will now be moving their troops at least 20 kilometers behind the border. At a later time, this buffer will be supposedly extending 60 or even 70 kilometers over a gradual period of time. But this deal apparently goes both ways. In return for a green light to attack Iranian targets in the region, Israel has supposedly agreed to refrain from harming any Syrian military sites. This could pose a somewhat moral dilemma in the future, as Syrian pro-regime factions have been linked to the horrific gassing of innocent Syrians over the last several years. Still, Israel has been seeking a buffer from Iranian proxy armies in the region for quite some time now. Despite Israel's denial, a Russian ambassador has seemingly acknowledged that this is a done deal. For Syria, however, the entire idea is moot, publicly at least.
ليس هناك وجود إيراني بمعنى الوجود العسكري على الأرض. هذه روايات إسرائيلية تحاول أن تستفيد من الهجمة الأمريكية ضد الجمهورية الإسلامية. في سوريا مستشارون إيرانيون بعضهم استشهد يعملون إلى جانب القوات المسلحة العربية السورية، وهم موجودون باتفاق وتنسيق مع قواتنا المسلحة حيث يجب أن يكونوا. لا توجد قواعد عسكرية ثابتة للجمهورية الإسلامية الإيرانية.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is currently on his way to Europe right now, where he'll hold a series of meetings with top leaders from the EU. The Prime Minister will be lobbying hard to push European leaders away from the nuclear deal with Iran. And while most believe Europe will likely stick to the deal no matter what, some still wonder if Netanyahu can sway Europeans on a few crucial details. Israel cheered U.S. President Donald Trump's decision last month to withdraw America from the JCPOA nuclear deal. That deal, originally established in 2015, lifted fierce economic sanctions on the regime in exchange for Iran deaccelerating its nuclear program. Israel, however, has contended that Iran still remains committed to developing weapons of mass destruction. Despite these claims, nuclear watchdogs have consistently cleared Iran for obeying the terms of the deal. In the wake of Trump's withdrawal, Iranian leaders have given Europe, Russia, and China an ultimatum. Stay in the deal, or we'll continue our nuclear program tomorrow. Netanyahu will now meet with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, then with French President Macron, in an attempt to convince them to walk away from the deal. The rest of the deal's signatories, however, say they remain committed to the JCPOA, if only because there's no plan B to fall back on. Those countries will likely keep a dialogue going with Iran in an effort to save the deal. At best, Netanyahu may only win concessions when it comes to the deal's points on long-range missiles and its sunset provision clauses.
16 years ago, the Israeli government began building a massive security wall around the perimeter of the Palestinian West Bank. Today, construction has largely been frozen and less than 2/3 of the wall has actually been built. Well, it looks like it's going to stay that way for a while longer because the Knesset has just struck down a bill which would have forced the government to complete the barrier, delaying construction, possibly for years to come.
Israel originally undertook the project as a way to halt deadly terror attacks. For that reason, the wall is designed for one reason only: to keep out Palestinians who would otherwise illegally enter the country and possibly commit acts of terror. At this time, the government predicts that nearly a third of all terror attacks have been committed by Palestinians who broke through a gap in the wall near the Gush Etzion region. And yet, the majority of Knesset members voted against a proposal to finally finish the wall once and for all. Many speculate that the reason why is rooted deep in politics. The wall's original path was designed as a perimeter around Palestinian and Palestinian-owned land in the West Bank. But in the 16 years since, numerous Israeli settlements have been built in these territories, meaning if the wall were ultimately finished, it would isolate or even cut off these settlements from the rest of Israel. This is another reason why the wall itself was blasted by the international community and accused of helping Israel allegedly steal Palestinian land. Right-wing Israelis and religious extremists believe finishing the wall would create a de facto border for a future Palestinian state. But as Israeli settlements grew and hope for a two-state solution dimmed, the Defense Ministry slowly halted the wall's construction. The project has been almost totally frozen for the last 10 years. Prime Minister Netanyahu promised 3 years ago to finish the wall amidst growing infiltrations and terror incidents. But after this new vote, clearly this isn't going to happen anytime soon.
A shocking media report has just set off a political bombshell. The Uvda television program has accused Prime Minister Netanyahu of ordering the Shin Bet to place wiretaps on the former heads of both the IDF and the Mossad sometime in 2011. Though the report claims this information comes from unnamed sources close to the situation, both the Prime Minister and the former head of the Shin Bet, Cohen, have totally denied the allegations.
The statement from Cohen, who would have been in his early tenure at the time of the alleged request, is unambiguous. Cohen says, quote, "Prime Minister Netanyahu never asked me to listen in on former Mossad chief Tamir Pardo or former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz. I was surprised by the report. This is nonsense," end quote. Netanyahu released a similar denial on Twitter, saying that what he prefers to listen to in his free time isn't his co-workers, but rather, quote, the Beatles, the first albums, and ABBA. Despite these firm denials, the accusations have others rattled to the core. The report claims that Netanyahu ordered the wiretaps due to unfounded claims that his colleagues may have been leaking information. Others suggest that Netanyahu simply questioned their loyalty. Opposition members in the Knesset are demanding a complete and thorough investigation into these allegations, and it's important to note here that this request was supposedly rejected in 2011 by the same man who today says the request was never made in the first place.
New Yorkers just had one heck of a block party to celebrate Israel's 70th birthday. Tens of thousands of supporters wore blue and white and marched up Fifth Avenue to participate in the Celebrate Israel parade this weekend. And even a few Israeli lawmakers were there as well. The big event was actually led by New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and Governor Andrew Cuomo.
The day's festivities proudly put the last 70 years of Israeli accomplishments front and center. There were Israeli flags waving as far as the eye could see, along with musical acts, street performers, floats, and face painting. But the grand finale was quite the sight to behold. At the parade's finish line in Times Square, organizers rented out the square's iconic billboards and electronic screens to display pictures of Israel from the last 70 years. And of course, to play a clip of Netta Barzilai's Eurovision-winning song, Toy. Hey, certainly wouldn't be a party without that.
Among the masses of attendees were Israeli Culture Minister Miri Regev, along with her fellow ministers Sofa Landwehr and Ofir Akunis. Israel's Consul General in New York, Dani Dayan, was also present, along with Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danan. The city ratcheted up security amidst some concerns that the gathering might attract the wrong kind of attention. But as you can see from the smiling faces, this was a day well worth celebrating. New Yorkers sure know how to put on a show.
At least 25 in Guatemala are dead following the deadly eruption of the Fuego volcano yesterday. The toxic ash, smoke, and molten rock have consumed much of the rural countryside, leaving a tragic path of devastation. And Israel's foreign ministry has immediately responded to this tragedy. The government will now be sending about $10,000 worth of aid to those who have been affected by the disaster.
At this time, there's still no final word on whether or not Israel will send rescue workers to help with the efforts on the ground. But Israeli organizations like IsraAid have often been first responders to crises like these all over the world. For now, though, the Foreign Ministry's aid package will consist of much-needed medicine, food, and blankets. The lethal explosion of the Fuego volcano has destroyed homes, roads, and much of the surrounding area's infrastructure. Many more are feared injured or dead beyond the initial estimate of 25. If this crisis escalates, we may soon see Israeli boots on the ground lending a helping hand.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. In honor of Maroon 5's awesome new video, today's word is Hum Almoni, which means maroon in Hebrew. To be honest, almost nobody mentions this color, but we think Hum Almoni should get some credit. It's a beautiful brownish red color, and when it's translated word for word in Hebrew, it actually means brown chestnut. After all, chestnuts do have a maroony tinge, don't they? Learning Hum Almoni is making me hungry.
All right, today marks the first day of Tel Aviv's Pride Week, quite possibly the single biggest celebration of LGBTQ freedom in the Middle East. And this week-long event will culminate in the annual Tel Aviv Pride Parade this Friday, but things have already kicked off with a bit of news that has the entire community beaming. Ovadia Cohen, the grandson of former Chief Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, has just announced that he will tie the knot with his longtime boyfriend next week.
For members of Israel's LGBTQ community, this is a historic and symbolic moment. The State of Israel's religious laws often do not recognize same-sex marriages or rights for same-sex partners, and the community has spent decades struggling for equal rights. Now, the past few years have seen a few significant wins for the gay community, though at this time the state still does not offer civil marriages. But the news of Ovadia Cohen's marriage to longtime boyfriend Amichai Landsman is a symbol of hope, not only as a celebration of love in all its forms, but also because of Cohen's historic lineage. Cohen's parents divorced at an early age, and he was mostly raised by his grandfather, former Chief Sephardic Rabbi, Rabbi Yosef. As an adult, Cohen married a woman and they had 2 children. He later divorced and then came out as homosexual. Sometime after that, he met his husband-to-be, who grew up in a religious Zionist community in Haifa. The two have lived together for several years now, practicing a religious lifestyle. Israel's religious leaders have often butted heads with the country's homosexual community. In extreme cases, they've even advocated for conversion therapy instead of embracing the homosexual lifestyle. Though homosexuality remains taboo for some Orthodox, others have warmly embraced the gay community and have begun to join the rally cry of thousands all over the world for equality in the name of love. Cohen's wedding is the very embodiment of that promise. The ceremony will be ordained by Zaharit Sorek, a woman who identifies as both a lesbian and an Orthodox Jew.
Tel Aviv is bustling with visitors from around the world who are all here in Israel to celebrate Tel Aviv Pride Week. The big Pride Parade is set to take place tomorrow, and a record number of people are expected to attend. It's fair to say that I don't think the country has ever looked so colorful.
That's a look at last year's Pride Parade. Pretty impressive, right? Well, this year's event is expected to be even bigger and better. Hundreds of thousands of people from around the world will be marching down the Tel Aviv Promenade tomorrow to celebrate this year's theme, The Community Makes History. The special theme is actually meant to acknowledge 3 historical milestones for Israel: 10 years since the founding of the Gay Center in Tel Aviv, 20 years since Tel Aviv's first Pride Parade, and of course, 70 years of Israeli independence. Talk about a cause for celebration. American TV personality Andy Cohen will be serving as the Tel Aviv Pride International Ambassador this year. And Israeli Eurovision winner Netta Barzilai is also making yet another big debut at the famous beach party that takes place every year at the end of the parade route. Last year, more than 200,000 people from around the world attended the big event, and about 30,000 of them are estimated to have come in from overseas. But even if the parade is tomorrow, the parties have already begun. If you have the chance to walk outside today, all you'll see is rainbow. And let me tell you, it looks good.
And now for this week's Top 5 with ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh.
A few weeks back, I told you all about the top 5 signs that make you a true Tel Avivian, and now the list continues. You can spot a hardcore Tel Avivian from miles away, and these are a few ways to tell how. Number 1 on our list is zero shame. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm sure you probably already know people here in Tel Aviv have no shame when it comes to asking where you live, how much your rent is, and to ask you if your apartment's renovated or not. Completely unlike anyone in the States, the rent in the city is so high that if you're living in a renovated apartment with an elevator, parking, and a balcony, you're doing something right, and everyone wants to know about it. So if someone on the street asks you, how much do you pay? That's their way of saying nice place. Number 2 is Get Taxi, the Uber of the Holy Land. Now, you might be asking what makes Get Taxi a sign that you're from Tel Aviv. It doesn't. What does is when you get into the Get Taxi that you ordered and typically put in your desired destination, you still somehow end up directing the driver on every possible turn you could take to get you there just a few minutes faster. Tel Avivians are somehow always in a rush to be somewhere. Third up is our very good friend AMPM, the 7-Eleven of Tel Aviv. Now, for those who don't know about this, the second the sun sets on Friday until it sets back again on Saturday, most restaurants in Israel, cafes, supermarkets, and well, pretty much everything in the city is closed, except for our trusted 24/7 AMPM superstores. So, if you don't know where the closest AMPM store is to you, do you really even live in Tel Aviv? Fourth on our list is something you've definitely noticed if you've ever been to, seen a picture of, or heard of the city of Tel Aviv: the casual outfits people wear. Absolutely everywhere. Whether it be on a first date, to work at the office, or even a wedding, you can be sure to see at least one person wearing shorts, a tank top, and most likely a pair of flip-flops. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good casual, comfy outfit, but come on, we can do better than that to a wedding, no? Last, but as you already know, not least, is the fact that you immediately dislike / are confused by anyone who doesn't live in the city of Tel Aviv, especially those who reside outside and come for a visit to Tel Aviv Beach on the weekends. Honestly, what are you doing living anywhere but this gorgeous city? Well, actually, after making this list, I might be reconsidering it too. Just kidding, I love it here. You should come. That's all for today's Top 5. Back to you.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.